Namaste, Salam, Sat Sri Akal, everyone. My name is Anu Sehgal, and I'm the founder of The Culture Tree, which is a cultural literacy and language education company based in the US. I'm so honored to be presenting the series of three events, virtual events, along with the Consulate General of India in New York to mark and also celebrate India's 75th Independence Day, or Azadi Amrit Mahotsav. The topic that we'll discuss today is around our grand old flag, the Tiranga. Three stripes and a wheel doesn't sound much, does it? But the mere sight of our Tiranga fluttering in the breeze against the vast blue sky can set over 1 billion hearts racing with pride and joy. I couldn't have thought of anyone else but author and journalist Rupa Pai to share her thoughts about the Tiranga and how it came into being. Rupa Pai is one of India's best known writers for children. She lives in Bangalore and has written over 25 books, ranging from picture books to chapter books, and fiction to nonfiction, on themes as varied as sci fi fantasy, popular science, math, history, economics, Indian philosophy, life skills, and more recently, medicine. Many of her books are bestsellers and are enjoyed as much by adults as by children. And she's definitely a family favorite in my family. Her best known books include the 8-part Taranauts, the award winning national bestseller, The Gita for Children, the Vedas and Upanishads for children. She has also co-authored fitness evangelist and supermodel Milan Soman's memoir, Made in India. I am so excited to pass it on to Rupa Pai, who will take us through the Tiranga, its evolution, and the journey.
Namaste, Namaskar, good evening, Sat Sri Akal, Salam Alaikum. Welcome to this very unusual, I think, for me at least, this is the first time I'm doing this, a presentation on the evolution of our national flag, Hamara Tiranga. Now, I'm really grateful to the Indian Consulate at New York City for giving me this opportunity to research this topic, because it's always been something I've been interested in but never gone deep into, and I'm really excited to be researching this on the 75th year of our independence. I mean, about time, right? To start researching our own national flag and to know how it came to be. So very excited to be here. And guess what? When I was asked to come up with a topic that I wanted to talk about and perhaps share this information with children and adults and families in the Indian diaspora, otherwise, the first, just out of the top of my head, I said, why not the evolution of the Indian flag? How did Hamara Tiranga come to be? And guess what? It turned out to be a very propitious choice, because what I figured when I did my research was that the very first version of what eventually, there were versions before, but the very first version of what eventually became the Tiranga was launched, was presented to the country exactly 100 years ago in 1921. See, things like this happen sometimes, and these are great omens, and it's just lovely to be here in the 100th year after the first version of what eventually became our national flag was presented, to be doing this talk. So I've had a very interesting time researching it. There's lots of fun stuff I'm going to share with you. And I thought, because we're talking, usually I'm not one for big PowerPoint presentations. I usually like to establish a rapport with my audience by just speaking to them. But we are talking about the flag, and I can't obviously keep describing all the many different versions of the flag. So I decided that this time it would be heavy on graphics and visuals. So I would use a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Join me on this journey. We will be covering maybe a little more than 160 years of the evolution of our national flag in this talk. So I'm going to start sharing now. So all the best, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I hope you can see my screen now. So, Hamara Tiranga, the evolution of our national flag. Now, our story begins way back in 1857. I don't know how many of you know this, but in India, we study this. This date means a lot to all of us who study history in India, because 1857 is the year when the first war of Indian independence was launched against the British Empire, British Kingdom, against the British rulers. And this 1857 is exactly 100 years after the very first time the British acquired territory in India. That happened in 1757, another very important date, because until then, the British were traders. You see, until 1857, in fact, the country, all the territories in India were not owned by the British Crown, but by a corporate called the British East India Company. They were traders, and they had been trading in India since 1600 CE. That had been already so many years of trading with India, but they were not rulers. They did not become landowners until 1757. Now, what used to happen was that the East India Company were traders. They had to compete with other European powers also wanting to trade with the subcontinent, which is India, because India was a rich, rich land full of things that the British wanted and needed and could trade for money. So they would bring gold and silver from Britain and trade it for goods from India, all kinds of wonderful goods, silks and indigo and spices and pepper and so many wonderful things that everybody in Europe wanted. So the British the naval force was very strong, and they soon became masters of the waters. So they became prominent among European powers to be trading with India. And they had very special contracts with the kings of India, because, you know, at that time, India wasn't really thought of as one single country. There were a lot of hundreds of princely states, and borders were constantly shifting. And if you had a good contract with one of these princely states, then you could become exclusive trading partners, and no other Europeans would get that contract, and you could trade with India, with that kingdom at least, all by yourself. And this was very prized. Now, once the British started trading with India, they needed to protect their what were called the factories, the trading stations, because these factories were always under attack by either Indian princes or, you know, it was just open. They were very vulnerable. So they began to have little private armies. Each of the factories began to have little private armies. Now, if somebody, and the British were a little ahead of us in warfare, you know, in equipment. So a lot of Indian kings began to ask for their help in winning over their Indian neighbors, because this was an army. This was a small army, private army, but they were very strong and they had a very advanced weaponry. So the Indian princes began to talk to the British traders to ask them for help in winning against their neighbors in small wars. And the British began to help, but always in return for their services to a king or a prince or a Nawab, what they got in return was an exclusive trading contract or some special privileges in trading with the kingdom, stuff like that, until 1757 in Bengal, in a battle called the Battle of Plassey. That's when, for the very first time, the Nawab who they helped win, gave them land instead of money or instead of trading privileges, and said, you know what, you can collect the taxes from this so many villages, and that can be yours. That's what I'm giving you in return. And that's when the British realized that this was a much better gig. My God, we can collect the money from here. We can use their own money to buy stuff. We don't have to bring gold from England. This is great. What we should start doing now is move from being traders to becoming rulers. We need to own land in India. That's the best way to go about it. So starting from 1757, they began conquering aggressively, you know, and then by 1857, the major opposition from Indian rulers to the East India Company had all been quashed. So in the south, Tipu Sultan had been subdued. In the west, the Marathas had been subdued. In the north, the Mughals and the Sikhs had been subdued. And in the east, anyway, Calcutta and Bengal was their first place where they started getting land. So that place was anyway theirs. So by 1857, the flag of the East India Company was flying over most of India. Okay, so over a large part of India. So let's see what that flag looked like. Just 1 minute. This is the flag of the East India Company. They had this flag from 1600 onwards. It used to fly only on their factories, but now it was flying all over India. And does it remind you of any other country's flag today? I'm sure if you're listening in the US, you will say, oh, well, of course. This looks so much like the American flag. There are exactly 13 stripes. They are white and red, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. And what they have in the canton, in the upper canton, this is called a canton, a little image that appears in less than a quarter of the flag, but appears in the upper left corner. It's called a canton. And what you see, what is the canton? That is the Union Jack. That was the flag of Britain at the time. Now, this was actually also the flag under which George Washington fought, because the Americans, the American colonists, they said, you know, we would rather have somebody like the East India Company rule us, like they rule in India, rather than have this direct control of the British Queen. So even George Washington fought under this very same flag, and only later, well after 1776, the flag was changed to include the stars against the blue field in the upper canton. Okay, so this was the flag of the East India Company that was flying all over India as well. Now, 1857, by 1857, there was a lot of simmering discontent in India, exactly because so much of India had been taken over, and the East India Company's policies, they were trading men. They only thought about the bottom line. The bottom line is what profit you can make. They were not thinking, they were thinking only of how you can exploit this country, how you can exploit the land, the people, everything here to make maximum profit for ourselves. They were not thinking of the welfare of the people of India. They were only thinking of how to exploit the land. And this obviously, slowly but steadily, made them very, very unpopular with the Indians. In 1857, that simmering discontent exploded into what we today call the First War of Indian Independence. For the first time, in many, many different parts of India, people began rebelling against the East India Company. Okay, and of course, we call it in India the First War of Indian Independence. And what the British call it, very disparagingly in their history textbooks, is the Sepoy Mutiny, as if it was just some small uprising. You know, we think of it, we recognize it as an actual revolt. That was the first sign that the people of India would not take it anymore, and we would start working towards gaining independence for ourselves. And it took another 90 years, as you know, because this is 1857. Only in 1947 we finally got independence. So it took another 90 years to get there, but it all started with the revolt of the First Indian War of Independence in 1857. Now, when this happened, it took a long time for the East India Company to be able to subdue this revolt. It took over a year. And by 1858, the British Queen had got very involved, and she said, what is going on there in India? I mean, it's responsible for so much money coming to my treasury. But if people are not happy, and they're not happy with the East India Company's policies, then you guys are not doing a good job of keeping India happy and or ruling it well. And therefore, I think I should take the controls away from you. No longer East India Company. I am going to rule India directly. So in 1858, India became part of the British Empire, ruled directly by the crown. And in this case, the crown was Queen Victoria. She was Empress at that time, and she became Empress of India. Okay, so she began to rule directly. So there was no East India Company. The company was dissolved. All their territories in India became part of the British Empire, and a new phase in Indian-British relations began. And now, obviously, people start saying, hey, now we need a new flag. We need a new flag to represent this particular part of the empire that we call India. we need something to represent that. We need a new flag. And therefore, the next stage in the evolution of the flag came to be. This was called the first flag, and this was to represent India, which as part of the British Empire. So what is this flag? Again, in the left canton, upper canton, it has the Union Jack. The British flag is called the Union Jack, so that's what it is. It's a red field, red background, and somewhere on the right half, in the right half of the flag, in the middle of the right vertical half of the flag, you have this particular logo. What you see in the center, that 5-pointed star, that was called the Star of India. And this whole symbol, this whole logo, was the design of an award, of a medal that the Queen awarded to Indian subjects. So this was exclusively made for India. It was the design of an award or a medal. It was called the Order of the Star of India. And it was awarded only to Indian subjects who performed great services for the empire. So this was the next flag. And around this time, between 1858 onwards, there were many different flags that were used, right, to represent India. They had a different flag for the naval flag was different, the civil flag was different. So they had a variety of different flags. All those flags as a group together were called the Star of India, because they always had the Star of India ensign somewhere there. In 1885, there was a new flag was designed, and this was called the Viceroy and Governor General's flag. Now, who was a viceroy? Who was the Governor General? Earlier, when the East India Company used to rule, a person called the Governor General was in charge of India. When the Queen took over, when the Crown took over India, a new post was created called the Viceroy. But there was no Governor General. He was both Viceroy and Governor General. And the very first Viceroy of that India was called Lord Canning. But never mind him. 1885, a new flag called the Viceroy's flag was created. And here, this is what it looks like. This was the Viceroy's flag. So it was basically the Union Jack, right? And in the middle, there was the Star of India, bang in the middle. And above that was a crown to show that India came under the protection of the British Crown. And this was, of course, the symbol for India itself, the Star of India. Mind you, through all these years, right until 1947, the original Union Jack, the flag of Britain, was flown everywhere in India, okay, also. But when India was represented in international events, then this flag was used, the Viceroy's flag. In fact, I'll just go back to the previous slide. This particular flag also was used during international events sometimes. And one of the main events when this particular flag, the first flag, was used was during the Second World War. The Second World War was fought between 1939 and 1945. And in 1942, there was a declaration made. It was called the Declaration of United Nations. This was when, I think this was on New Year's Day in 1942. And this was when these four allies, the four countries that we now know as the Allies, came together and said, we will fight this menace. We will fight Germany. We will fight Hitler as a combined unit. And those four countries were, as most of us know, the UK, the USA, Russia, which was called the USSR, and China. So they first came and signed this document on New Year's Day in 1942, saying that we are the Allies and we will fight the other side, the Axis powers. They were called the Axis powers, Italy, Germany, all on the other side. And as part of the signatories, the next day, many more countries signed, including the Dominions. Dominions were countries that were originally ruled by the British, but had gained independence, but still wanted to be associated with the British, like Australia. So there were some other countries that signed in the following days. And the only country that was not independent of the British, which also signed this declaration, was India. And this was the flag used to represent India during the signing of the Declaration of United Nations. Of course, many of you know that after the Second World War, the United Nations became an actual organization where most of the countries in the world are signatories, are member countries. And now it sort of acts as a proxy court, and it helps out, intervenes between conflicts between countries. It sees that it sends troops to places where it's needed, United Nations troops. It gives out money for education, for various other things. It's a sort of world government, the United Nations. So this flag was used there. But this flag, the Viceroy's flag, was also used in many international events, including, let's see, yeah. So the unofficial national flag was used in the Amsterdam Olympics in 1928. What do you see on the left? As some players of the Indian hockey team holding up the so-called Indian flag. Only it wasn't an Indian flag, it was the Viceroy's flag, but for all official and other purposes, it was the flag of India. It was also used as recently as, until the Berlin Olympics 1936, even there, that flag is used to represent India. Okay, so this was the unofficial national flag of India, and it was used in international events all the way until 1947. But when we talk about the British flag came down and the tricolor went up on Independence Day 1947, we mean not this flag, but the original British flag, the Union Jack, which also kept flying all over India. Okay, now, who was the Viceroy when the Viceroy's flag first came into being? The Viceroy's flag first came into being in 1885. And in 1884, a new Viceroy had taken over from the previous one, Lord Ripon. And the new Viceroy's name was Lord Dufferin. Lord Dufferin had had a very illustrious diplomatic and military career. He had been Governor General of Canada. He continues to be, his name and his wife's name are on many, many institutions in Canada. So they're very, very popular in Canada. So he'd been there. After he'd come back from there, he had served as ambassador to Turkey and to many other places, to Russia, to Turkey. But his biggest ambition was to be Viceroy of India. He wanted that title so bad. He wanted to retire with that title, calling himself Viceroy of India. And in 1884, India was such a plum posting. It was the jewel in the British crown. Every British officer wanted to be associated with India. It meant something really, really big. So in 1884, he took over and became Viceroy of India. He turned out to be a very popular Viceroy. He was popular with all kinds of groups of different Indians, and he really felt that the British government should go easy. They were doing many unfair things, and so he was very popular. And what he did do also during his reign was he sort of started the seed of the Indian army. It was him who started a sort of a corps, an imperial corps, where Indian soldiers could be officers as well and not only soldiers. But the other important thing he did, I'll come to in a little bit after I tell you about his wife. Now, his wife, the Lady Dufferin, if it was possible, was even more popular than her husband, because what she took on during her time in India was to improve the medical health and facilities for Indian women. Okay, and this happened specifically because she had been asked as a special personal request by Queen Victoria to make sure that she did this while she was here, to improve the lot of medical health for Indian women. And what she did, among other things, was to push for a lot of training was given. She created a fund. She asked for donations from very, very wealthy Indian princes, and she was so persuasive that she managed to get together a huge fund, the Lady Dufferin Fund. And from there, she used it for training midwives and doctors and sanitation workers and health workers in India, to tell them what exactly is to be done in every situation, hygiene, sanitation, all that. But what she also realized during her time in India was that Indian women, most of them were still behind the parda. They were very shy. They didn't know how to interact in society. They stayed behind the screens. They stayed at home, and most of them used midwives. And Queen Victoria had told her that, particularly in terms of childbearing, their health, during that time, please take care of them and teach them how to take care of themselves. And she realized that many of them did not come out of their houses and go to regular hospitals because they could not bear the thought of exposing their bodies to male doctors. So that was the problem. So through her fund, she went after female hospitals, female nurses, female doctors. And in fact, two of the earliest female Indian doctors benefited from her fund. She gave the money. From her fund, they got the money. And who are these people? One of them was called Anandibai Joshi. Okay, she was the earliest. She was from Bombay Presidency, from the Bombay area, but she went off to Calcutta to study. She was not very well, not in very good health, but very keen to study. And most of all, luckily for her, she had a very strong supporter in her husband, who completely pushed her. And she actually got admission in an American medical college. She went there, studied medicine, got an MD in 1886. She was only 21. She got an MD and she came back to India, but very, very tragically, she passed away the very next year because of tuberculosis. So that was a very sad thing for all of us. But the other female doctor, who was, her name was Kadambini Ganguly. She was from Calcutta, and she entered Calcutta Medical College in 1884, the very first female student admitted in the Calcutta Medical College. And because she was healthy, thank God, she became the first Indian woman to practice medicine in India. Okay, so that was the whole, the greatness of, achievement of Lady Dufferin's fund. Okay, the other, like I was telling you, I'll tell you later about what Lord Dufferin presided over, another very important event in the history of India. In 1885, an organization was formed called the Indian National Congress. And that is the same party that we still have as one of the opposition parties in our parliament today. And the Indian National Congress became India's party, the party that, the organization that fought for independence, that, Gandhiji was part of, Nehru was part of, Lokmanya Tilak, there was Lala Lajpat Rai, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, all these people, any freedom fighter that you can think of that was once a part of the Indian National Congress. Many, all our leaders, all our founding fathers used to be part of the Indian National Congress. And that was founded in Lord Dufferin's time, and he completely encouraged it. And so this is a picture from the very first meeting of the Indian National Congress in Bombay on December 28th. They met for the first time for 3 days, December 28th to 31st. And strangely enough, ironically enough, the person who was instrumental in starting it, in urging everyone to become part of the Indian National Congress, was an Englishman. He was a British civil servant, in fact, like an IAS officer, but from the British side. And his name was Allan Octavian Hume. You see his picture here. He's also here. If you can see my cursor, I can point out to him in the middle of this group photograph. There he is, Allan Octavian Hume. And what he did, he used to resist the British government's policies a lot and say they were unfair. He used to talk a lot against policies, particularly in agriculture and economic reforms. He was not happy at all with how the British were treating Indians, but he was also equally frustrated with the Indians for not standing up for themselves, for not coming together. And he wrote a letter, an open letter. He was very closely associated with Calcutta University. So he wrote an open letter to the graduates of Calcutta University saying, all of you should come together. What are you guys doing? You have to stop complaining about that we don't treat you right, the British don't treat you right. You only get what you deserve. So you guys have to come together. You have to commit to giving it your all, your time, your effort, put it all out there for your country, and then you will get the independence you require. And I'm going to read out a little poem that he wrote, just 2 paragraphs from that poem, which I thought was very nice. So he said basically that you should take charge of your own freedom. And this is the poem he wrote. Are ye serfs or are ye freemen? Like, are you servants or are you independent people? Are ye serfs or are ye freemen, ye that grovel in the shade? Why are you groveling? Why are you kneeling down? Why are you bowing to the British? In your own hands rest the issues. By themselves are nations made. So I'll read that again. Are ye serfs or are ye freemen, ye that grovel in the shade? In your own hands rest the issues. By themselves are nations made. Sons of Ind, Ind means India. Sons of Ind, be up and doing. Let your course by none be stayed. Lo, the dawn is in the east. by themselves are nations made. So this is the kind of, very inspiring poems and words that Alan Octavian Hume used to put out, and the Congress came together, and it stayed until we got independence and continues to last to this day. But we have to be grateful to Lord Dufferin for that he was liberal-minded enough that he allowed this to happen, right? And we're still talking about flags, I know, but I thought all this was really interesting background information that you should know, that while these flags were being used, what else was happening. Right. Now we move quickly by how many years? That's 20 years. We move to 1905, when one other very significant event in the history of India happened. This was the partition of Bengal. Okay, Bengal, the Bengal presidency was the largest province in India, in British India, with some 78 million people. So it was very difficult to govern. And if you can see my cursor, I'm pointing out. So what used to happen was that the western part of this province, because it was closer to India, would get all the attention, and this was developing. Calcutta was the hub of every activity, art, culture, politics, everything was happening in Calcutta. This was very vibrant, but this part was always very neglected. And the British always felt that somehow we are not able to give all the areas attention because it's just too large, it's just too bulky to be administered as one province. So Lord Curzon, at least that was his excuse, he said, because it's too difficult to manage by ourselves, I'm going to cut a line through it and make it Eastern Bengal. I'm combine it with Assam, and in West Bengal, I'm going to add Bihar and Odisha, and this is what I'm going to do. Now, this was very hugely opposed. Why? Everybody was unhappy with it. See, the other thing to remember was, in India, language is what unites and divides, not so much religion. Religion as well, but language is a very important bringer together of people. Okay, so when by dividing Bengal right through the middle, what Lord Curzon did was he separated the people who speak Bengali into two different states. And if you see on the left-hand side, see, Eastern Bengal is much larger, right? All the way to Chittagong, and Dhaka was the capital. So this was Eastern Bengal. So there were a lot, even in this area, and because Shillong, Assam, all people spoke different languages, the majority speakers of any language in Eastern Bengal were still Bengali speakers. But what was happening on the west side? The people who spoke Bengali got restricted to this small area. And in fact, there were more people speaking Bihari or Odia because it got fused with these places. Okay, so this was not, and the other important thing was that the people on this side, on the west side, were mostly Hindu, and the people in the Eastern Bengal side were mostly Muslim. So even though Lord Curzon kept insisting that I'm only doing this to make it easier to administer, Indians were not convinced at all. The Hindu Bengalis, the Bengali Hindus were very upset. They said, first of all, we're going to become linguistic minority in this side. Our language will not be spoken by a lot of people. And secondly, you are dividing us. We are children of the same mother. We speak the same language. How can you divide us? And the Muslims were not happy either. They opposed the move as well because they felt, this is a good way now to keep us away from all progress, to cut us off from any progress that might have happened. Now, obviously, you'll not even treat us well. So nobody was very happy with this in the beginning, right? And in fact, but what began to happen later was that the Muslims in the Eastern Bengal side began to see that, oh, actually, we're getting a lot more attention this way. We have a lot more say in our own rule. So they began to like this whole division, but the Hindus and the rest of India did not like it at all because they saw it as a very cunning maneuver by the British, which they were all famous for anyway, to divide and rule, to divide the Indians who could be a very strong force when they were together, to divide them on the lines of, territory or language or religion, divide them, make them enemies. So then we don't have to do anything. They will keep fighting among themselves. We don't have to do much. So there was a lot of opposition to this. So even though the partition actually happened on October 16th, protests against the partition began well in advance. Okay, so, and one of the main people who took a great interest and led the movement against partition was a man called Surendranath Banerjee. This is him. And well before the Indian National Congress had been formed, he had founded the first Indian Association of Intellectuals to fight against the British rule. And that organization was called the Indian National Association. So that had happened in 1876, but now he became a huge protester against the partition of Bengal, and he was organizing boycotts everywhere. What kind of boycotts? The most famous boycotts were the boycott of British-made goods. This had sort of happened in some form or the other since 1850, okay, but this became, he became very focused on boycotting Indian-made goods, okay, and on August 7th, he said, boycott is such a negative word. We should stop using boycott. Let's use a more positive word that brings all Indians together and makes us feel like we need to do this for our country. We need to boycott British goods for our country. Instead of saying boycott, let's call it Swadeshi, Swadeshi, something made in our own country, something that belongs to us. Swa is our and Deshi is land. So anything that's made by us, for us, let's use that, let's support that. Let's boycott everything that is foreign made. And therefore, on August 7th, 1905, before the partition, the Swadeshi movement was launched. What you see here is both Muslim people, Hindu people of Bengal burning all their British-made clothes. The fire hasn't been set yet, but this would have become a bonfire, and this would have happened. So August 7th, 1905, the Swadeshi movement was born. I'll tell you why we're talking about this. Now, this is just a sidelight to commemorate the date of the launch of the Swadeshi movement. Since 2015, India has celebrated August 7th as National Handloom Day. It's a very big thing. It's a very big deal. And now, if you look at India, Indian Instagram accounts, on August 7th, they'll be full of people wearing handloom, fabrics, because we have a lot of it in India, handloom textiles. And we're still, very fond of them. We still support them. And now this has got an extra boost since 2015 with calling it the National Handloom Day. Now, this is the next flag that we're going to talk about, and I'll tell you how it's connected to the Swadeshi movement. So the Swadeshi movement was launched, as I told you, on the 7th of August, 1905. So on the 7th of August, 1906, it was the first anniversary of the Swadeshi movement. And there was Bengal was still divided. So protests were still going on. And this flag was hoisted at a Maidan called Parsi Bagan in Calcutta. And as part of the celebration, as part of the protests, this flag was launched. This was the very first sort of gives you some kind of feeling of the Tiranga today, not quite, but it still has 3 horizontal bands. And let me explain to you the significance of this flag. This was designed by 2 Bengalis called Hemchandra Kanungo and Sachindranath Bose. And so the first stripe, as you can see, is in saffron. And these 8 sort of lotuses, I think they're supposed to represent lotuses, are supposed to represent the 8 provinces of India, right? So there is an orange stripe, there is a yellow stripe, and then there's a green stripe. And the green stripe on the left has a sun, which represents the Hindus, and a star and crescent, which represents the Muslim population, to show that we are all part of this. And in the middle, of course, that is the rallying cry of the Congress party, has always been in Devanagari script. You see the words. For those of you who can't read Devanagari, what it says is Vande Mataram, means I bow to you, mother. The mother in question being Mother India. So this was the first flag. It was launched, it was called the Calcutta flag, raised on the 7th of August, 1906. What happened next? I just want to show you first the 8 provinces of British India, because we said that those 8 are supposed to represent the 8 provinces. What were they? Assam, Bengal, Bombay, Burma, the central provinces, Madras, Punjab, and the United Provinces. In this map, it's not a very clear map, I know, because there's lots of little squiggles on it, and you can't see it very clearly, but this is an actual map from that time. And you see the pink areas. What the pink areas are the provinces. You see Burma is here, Bengal is here, and this was at this time Bengal was divided. So you see Eastern Bengal and Western Bengal and just Bengal, but this is actually one province, the province of Bengal. There's United Provinces, there is Punjab here, there is Bombay Presidency, there is Madras Presidency, there is Central Provinces, right? So these are the 8 provinces. The yellows that you see were princely states. So they were still ruled by kings and princes, but they were subservient to the British rule, to the British Empire. So they were allowed to retain some amount of independence. They were not directly under the British, but they were subservient to the British. So this was what happened in the flag that came out in 1907, right? 1906. Now, the next year, again in August 22nd, 1907, another flag, which was quite similar to this flag, just a few changes, was raised on foreign soil for the first time. It wasn't raised in India. It was raised in Stuttgart, in Germany, at a conference where there were people of many countries. And who raised it? A very unsung hero, a woman who is not very well known. Her efforts are not very well known. Her name is not talked about much. Her name was Bhikaiji Cama, Bhikaiji Rustam Cama. Now, she was from the Bombay Presidency. She was, a woman way ahead of her time, and she had been exiled from India for anti-national activities. Poor thing, she didn't leave India as an exile. She left in 1902 because after working a lot on the Great Plague in Bombay, she mobilized people. She helped women to, she herself took care of many, many people and did a lot of work during the Great Plague. She caught the plague herself. She recovered, but she was so weakened by the whole disease that she went off to London for treatment. She came from a very wealthy family, but she was greatly impressed and inspired by the Indian National Congress and wanted to do things for India, for the emancipation of India, for the freedom of India. Unfortunately, she got married to a person, he was also a very good lawyer, very well known, but his sympathies lay with the British. He thought it was best that the British continue to rule us. So that marriage didn't do very well because they were absolutely opposite sides of the spectrum, and he completely did not support her nationalistic activities. So she went off to London in 1902, and she was supposed to return in 1904 after she got better. But by the time she had met people there, including Dada Bhai Nauroji, whose name is very famous as one of the great freedom fighters of India, and she became his secretary. She began to hear them talk about, lobbying for India's independence from outside India. And she began to say, oh, this is good. I can do stuff even when I'm here. So what she did was she began to speak at many different conferences everywhere. And wherever she went to speak, she would talk about how India was in such trouble and we need the support of the world. We need all of your support to help us to get free. And this is what she did when she went to Stuttgart. She got an opportunity to speak to many countries and nobody expected her to do it. She was just an Indian woman in a sari and pallu. Nobody expected, with the pallu demurely over her head. Nobody expected her to do this. But she went onto the stage. She was a fiery speaker and much in favor of women's rights. And she was always telling her sisters, not her real sisters, but her sisters in India, the women in India, that you have to get out and do your stuff yourself and empower yourself. Otherwise, you will never be included in the independence struggle. You have to do it for you. Your issues will never come up unless you go out and ask for things. And she unfurled this flag. And this was the first time an Indian flag was raised on foreign soil. And it was used again and again and again. She went to America, she spoke there. She went to Egypt, she spoke there. Wherever she went, she would take this flag and talk about it. And she became very close associates. First, she started being very moderate. As a moderate congresswoman, she would say, no, we'll do negotiation, we'll write letters, we will put petitions out, and hopefully we will get freedom. But by and by, seeing what happened during the First World War, the British said, you send your soldiers to us to fight for us on our side during the First World War. We will make sure you get a lot of freedoms and self-governance after that in India. And our leaders got convinced. They sent our soldiers, but at the end, the promises were not kept. So seeing all this, she became more of an extremist, and she began to be associated with more extremist leaders of the Indian movement, including the very famous Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. So she did a lot of stuff from there for the cause of Indian independence. And then she wanted to come back, but whenever she said she wanted to come back, the British said, we will only let you come back if you sign an undertaking that you will not indulge in any nationalist activities when you come back. And every time Madame Kama, even though she had all her family in India, said, no, that I will not do. I will not sign an undertaking saying I will not indulge in nationalist activities. So she continued to be in exile until she was 73. She kept moving. She moved from Britain to France, and there she was not safe, and she kept being moved around. People kept asking her. The British government in India said to France, you better send her back, repatriate, she needs to be sent back here for justice. The French government protected her. They said, we are not sending her. So in revenge or in retaliation, the British seized all her assets in India, which was huge, which was considerable, because she was a very wealthy heiress, but all her stuff was gone. Finally, when she was 73, she asked once more that, can I come back to India? And this time they said, they probably thought that she wasn't much of a threat anymore. She was old, she was ailing. So they allowed her to come back. And just 9 months after she came back to her beloved India, her beloved Bombay, she passed away. But, her name is not very well known, and we should know it more. Her name was Madam Bhikaiji, also she's known as Bhikaiji Kama. Here's her picture. And you can see on the painting on the right side that she's actually carrying that flag that she's most associated with. She was a Zoroastrian, a Parsi, and she did a lot for the cause of Indian independence from outside. We often forget people who carried on the struggle outside, even though they were not here, but she's one name to remember. Then time passed. In 1916, we were in the middle of the First World War. Like I told you, Indians were not at all happy with the way things were going in the First World War for India. The British kept promising that we will give you things, and they were not giving us the self-government or the representation in the parliament. And, they were not allowing us to rule ourselves in any small way also. And that's when, once again, people began to get really, really upset. When Lord Curzon partitioned Bengal, he thought he wrote to his superior saying, nobody will protest this, because the Congress, the Indian National Congress, is the only sort of team or party that is actually doing something, that is actually protesting, but they have lost their steam. They've run out of steam. And it was true, because the Congress party had been around since 1885. By 1905, they were losing a bit of their steam. They had split. There were conflicts within the Congress. All that had happened. But this partition of Bengal thing brought everybody together, and it gave a fresh new impetus to Congress. But the two sides did not, again there was conflict within the Congress, and they were not coming together. And that's when an Irish woman, a British woman called Annie Besant, she was what we call a theosophist. She was the founder of the Theosophical Society, and she got together with Bal Gangadhar Tilak, whose name you probably have heard of, very, very famous Indian freedom fighter, part of the triumvirate called Bal Pal Lal. Yeah, so he decided, he was an extremist, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and he said, let's do this. Let's launch the Home Rule movement. Together, they decided to launch a movement called the Home Rule movement, and they said, this is it. We want to be able to rule ourselves. That's all. No more compromises, no more pandering to the British. We will do. And they were also very, in the beginning, they were quite, they were not saying we want complete independence, full free, Swaraj. They were not asking for that. They said, we at least give us dominion status, allow us to rule ourselves while you still rule us from England, but don't put your people at the head of every organization. We want to be able to rule ourselves. And that's why this flag they came up with, where once again in the upper canton, the Union Jack is still there to show dominion status. We are somewhat subservient. We are part of the British Empire, but we rule ourselves. And this is a very unusual shaped flag. You see, it's not a rectangle. There is this, and then there are stripes of red and green. Always there were stripes of red and green, if you notice, in the earlier flags, because the red was supposed to represent the Hindus and the green was supposed to represent the Muslims, because especially by 1916, the Hindus and Muslims had begun to split, all caused by the partition of Bengal. Because, in 1911, what had happened was Lord Curzon gave in to the continuous protests all over India against the partition of Bengal. And he said, okay, fine, because King George visited in 1911 from England. And at the Delhi Darbar in 1911, he made the announcement that, okay, fine, you guys, you can have Bengal as one again together. It can be reunified. So the unification of Bengal happened in 1911. Now you would think people would be happy about this. Everybody should be happy about it. But what happened was Eastern Bengal, which had had a Muslim majority, had begun to see that there was a lot of power in being a majority in any state or country, right? They had always been a minority in India, and they said, oh, this is good. This works for us. Our voices are heard so much louder when we are the majority. So they had begun to enjoy that, and they were not for the reunification of Bengal at all. They were quite happy. And in fact, 1905, Bengal was partitioned. By 1906 itself, the All India Muslim League had been formed. Okay, so when the reunification happened, the people of Eastern Bengal were very upset. They said, what is this? So this is what the British does. They only listen to the Indian National Congress. They only listen to the Hindu voices. They don't listen to us. So this is not going to work. We are very unhappy with how this is going. So there was a lot of suspicion had come up between the Hindus and the Muslims, a lot of mistrust. So there was a lot of, it's very difficult when your own house is divided, right? How do you fight an enemy from outside if your own house is divided? So all the efforts of leaders during this time was to make sure that the Hindus and Muslims were on the same side in their fight against the British. And that's one of the reasons why the national flag of India, any version, always had a red for the Hindus, a green for the Muslims. This star and crescent is for the Muslims. And this, this is one star. Then there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, 8 provinces, 8 stars. But these stars are supposed to represent the Saptarishis, the constellation of Orion in the sky, in the night sky. Because the Saptarishis are revered by the Hindus. So this is a Hindu symbol. This is a Muslim symbol. This color is supposed to represent Hindus. This color was supposed to represent Muslims. And in all this unity, there was the Union Jack as well, presiding over all of it. So this was the 1916 flag. By 1918, however, the Home Rule movement ran out of steam. And in the background of all this, where was the father of the nation? So often we associate the Swadeshi movement, khadi, spinning, burning of British cloth, all that we associate very deeply with Mahatma Gandhi. But in 1905, when the Swadeshi movement was launched, he was nowhere on the horizon. He was fighting in faraway Africa. Of course, he was becoming a huge name there by 1905, but he was nowhere on the Indian scene. He was fighting for Indians there. Another person like Bhikaiji Cama, who was fighting for the Indian cause somewhere else, not for the cause of Indian independence, but for the cause of Indian equality against the British, against other colonial masters everywhere. So he wasn't there at all. But in 1915, around 1914, 1915, Gandhiji arrives in India. Okay, while this Home Rule movement has just been launched, all this is happening. And by the time the Home Rule movement came to an end by 1918, end of the World War, the First World War, Gandhiji had become a name to reckon with in Indian politics. Right, so I just wanted to show you these pictures. I spoke about Annie Besant, the British theosophist. That was her. This was Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and they adopted a new flag like we saw. This was the Home Rule movement flag for India. Next, the next thing happened in April 1921. And that's why this was the date, which I said is exactly 100 years ago. And I'm so happy to be talking about the evolution of the Indian flag, our Tiranga, today, exactly 100 years after the sort of the first kind of template for the flag we have today, quite similar to what we have today with a few variations, but this was the template. So in April 1921, first of all, in 1921, Gandhiji got elected the president of the Indian National Congress. And there was an Indian National Congress session in Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh in April. This was supposed to be March 31st and April 1st. 2-day, very intense session of the Congress Working Committee. They had to decide what kind of protest to do next, civil disobedience. That was Gandhiji's thing, and Satyagraha and all these things were being discussed. So when they were meeting in Vijayawada, Gandhiji had said that, he had noticed that in 1916 itself, a young freedom fighter who was a very, very devoted Gandhian and very smart from Andhra Pradesh called Pingali Venkayya, he had released a booklet with 30 possible designs for the Indian national flag. Now, we've talked about so many flags, but you probably have noticed that these flags were just, scattered attempts by people all over the place, not a combined sort of the whole country rallying behind a flag, not those kinds of flags. The Home Rule movement was mostly addressing educated Indians, so common people didn't know anything about that flag. And the Calcutta flag and the Stuttgart flag, the Berlin flag, it was called, the Berlin Committee flag by Bhikaiji Cama, that wasn't seen in India at all. And the Calcutta flag, was not limited to Calcutta. But now the Congress had become a body to reckon with. Everybody in India knew of Gandhi. So any flag that the Congress adopted for itself or for the nation would become very popular. So suddenly this began to, Gandhiji wrote in Young India in April 1921, he wrote that, you know what we need? We need a flag. That was the first time one of the great leaders of the country had said it so clearly. We need a flag for India. We need a symbol behind which all of us can rally. We need to carry that flag out to feel that sense of oneness. Whenever we march in processions, whenever we protest against something, we need to be carrying that flag. That will unite all Indians. We need that symbol to look up to. So he wrote about it. And in the Congress session, he said, we have to figure out a flag. That's one of the items on the agenda. And he had noticed Pingali Venkaya's 30 designs. And he writes that somehow none of them quite appeal to me. He's very, very assiduous worker, very dedicated, very conscientious, and very artistic, but somehow none of them seem to capture what I want to capture in a flag of India. But one of his Punjabi associates, Lala, I can't remember his name, but you can look it up. He said to Gandhiji in one of his conversations that, what we should really put on the flag, Gandhiji, is a charkha. Because by then, Gandhiji's use of the charkha, his support for Swadeshi, his boycott of British-made Indian goods, all that had become huge. And particularly in 1921, so many things happened. Not, right after the session at Vijayawada, that was when the main burning of 150,000 pieces of British clothing by Gandhiji in a mill in Parel in Bombay happened. That caught the national imagination like anything. Another thing happened in 1921. Gandhiji was touring Tamil Nadu, and when he was in Madurai and he was talking to people and telling people you should boycott British goods, you should buy Indian cloth, you should wear khadi. And he realized that in the South, a lot of people didn't wear khadi. And he asked them, why do you not wear khadi? I've been promoting it for so long. And they said, you know what? We can't afford khadi. It's handloom, it's handmade. It's an artisan or a person who's a weaver has to sit on it for so long that it becomes very expensive. British-made clothes are cheap, Gandhiji. But British-made goods means machine-made clothes are very much cheaper for us. We can't afford. And that's when Gandhiji said, oh my God, I never realized this. Now I have to go for it even more and make such a big production of khadi, that everyone should buy it. It should become really cheap. It should become accessible to everyone. And then at that time, when somebody told him he should put a charkha on the flag, he said, exactly, that's exactly the symbol I need. And it was in that trip in Tamil Nadu, in Madurai, in 1921, that Gandhiji, for the first time, took off all his British-made clothes, his shirts, his trousers. He stopped wearing all of that and went out to meet the public for the very first time in 1921 in Madurai in his loincloth, in his little dhoti. That became his uniform until his death. He said, if I don't promote khadi in what I am wearing myself, then what is the point? And I should wear it like the poorest people, and I should let them know that just wearing a little dhoti is enough. I wear it, you can wear it. We don't need all those heavy clothes in this tropical country. Just do this. So when somebody told him to put, when Lala, I shall find out and maybe you can Google it, when he gave him the idea that, you should put a charkha in the middle of the national flag, he said yes. And in fact, he called Pingali, who very happily came to visit him because Gandhiji was visiting Andhra Pradesh, his state. So Pingali Venkaya came to meet him. And Gandhiji said, I really appreciate your commitment to this national flag cause. I completely agree with you. I'm not very sure I like your designs, but here's what I want. I want a stripe for green for the Muslims. I want a stripe of red for the Hindus. And against that background, I want a charkha. And he came back with a design, man, Pingali in 3 hours flat. He came back with the design. This is not the design that you see. He came back with exactly what Gandhiji said, a green stripe, a red stripe, and a charkha on it. But the Congress session was so hectic. It was only 2 days and they had to discuss so many things that the flag design never came up, even though it was very dear to Gandhiji's heart and he wanted to have that flag by the end of the conference. It did not happen. But then Gandhiji writes that it was probably a very good thing, because I went back and thought about it. And what came up during the conference was that, okay, so Muslims, Hindus, what about the other communities? Do you want them to feel left out? Do you want them to feel that they are not being seen or heard or taken into account? And then Gandhi said, that's right. We need to include them as well. And he added a white stripe. And why in this order? Why is the white stripe on top that represents all the other communities? Why is the green stripe next? And why is the red stripe at the bottom? Given Gandhiji's brilliant, unassailable logic, he said the minorities are the ones who feel most threatened, so they should be topmost in the flag. We should give them the maximum importance, the white stripe on the top. The next people who probably feel a little unsafe in our country because they are not the majority are the Muslims. So their color should come second, green. And then, of course, the majority of us Hindus we should be able to support all the minorities, all the other communities, and therefore we should be the ones at the bottom holding up everybody else. And the charkha, of course, represents Swadeshi and represents the masses, the poor spinner, weaver, those communities. So they are also part of the Indian flag and represented. So that's how this flag came to be. This is Gandhi for the first time appearing. And you see Annie Besant here. I showed you her picture earlier. Here she is again walking with him. And this is his first time in a loincloth. Okay, this was 1921. All this happened exactly 100 years ago, all these anniversaries. And this particularly, him in this new costume happened on September 22nd, very recently. I mean, we've just passed the anniversary of that, the 100th anniversary of his first appearance in a loincloth. And this is Pingali Venkaya. So he is credited with being the person who actually created the very first design. You see, this is a postal stamp of India issued in 2009. On the top, you can see the flag I already showed you. On the bottom, you can see the flag that was finally adopted as a Congress flag, and that happened in 1931. So 1930, many things had happened. The Dandi March had happened. Gandhiji had just brought international attention to India and brought the whole of India together with the Salt March. And in 1931, in another Congress session, this flag was adopted. It was called the Swaraj flag, because earlier this flag was doing well, this flag was being accepted. But towards the end of the 1920s, the Sikh people began to say, hey, we also want representation of a particular color. Don't lump us with all the other communities. Don't say white is Sikhs and everybody else. We want our own representation. And then by then, Gandhiji, he evolved continuously. His ideas changed all the time based on what he'd seen and heard and experienced. So by the time, towards the late 1920s, Gandhiji himself had begun to say, no, this is wrong, We shouldn't be giving communal colors to our flag. The colors in the flag shouldn't be representing communities or religions, because all of us are the same. How does it matter what religion we are? We are all Indian. That is what it should uphold, the flag. So the colors of the flag or the stripes, the symbolism should be about qualities that we should have as Indians and not any particular religion at all. So that he had also started feeling that. But Nehru was like, you really want to change the flag now? It's become so popular. Everybody recognizes this flag. Everybody knows what it is. If we change it now, do you think especially people in far-flung areas, the illiterate people who may not know very much, will they identify this as the new Indian flag? But they constituted a national flag committee for the first time in 1931. And the National Flag Committee came back with this design because Nehru said, no, the only thing I don't like is the white on the top because it gets lost. He's right. If he's flying against a sky, or against anything, the white will get lost. Better if the white is in the middle. That was his suggestion. And they put the white in the middle and they said, red is nice, but maybe orange is better because it's the color of renunciation. It has been a very popular color in India always. So maybe we could use that because it as a color, it has much more significance to Indians than red. Red may be the color of weddings or something, but orange means renunciation, disinterestedness. Disinterested means not uninterested, but not going after power. being able to renounce the worldly things for something higher. So this was the flag that was adopted in 1931. This became the flag of the Congress, and it was used all the way until 1947. A blue charkha in the middle on a white stripe, an orange one for courage and sacrifice, the orange stripe for courage and sacrifice, the white stripe for truth and peace, and the green stripe for chivalry and hope. So, and prosperity, all that. We can give whatever, shades of meaning we want to it, but these were the original kind of meaning that Gandhiji and the Congress wanted. Now, when India got independence in 1947, this was the flag for an independent India that Lord Mountbatten proposed. He was a very popular viceroy as well, last viceroy of India. And, they Governor General, whatever. And he said, why don't you have this flag as Free India? Because he really wanted the Union Jack to be part of it still. Because, he said, but now we are all friends, and, you should have, you're part of the Commonwealth. So you should have the Union Jack as part of your flag. But can you imagine anybody in India, the leaders accepting this when they had fought so much for Swaraj, complete Purna Swaraj? We want to be entirely independent. We don't want to be a dominion of the UK. We want to forget all the association we had with you. We don't hate you. You're not our enemies. We didn't use violence to throw you out. That's different. But we don't want to have that kind of association with you anymore. And Nehru said, no, nobody will be happy with this. It'll just divide India again. I don't want to have it. He also suggested a flag for Pakistan. And he said, this should be the flag of Pakistan. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, he said, are you kidding me? How can I have a cross? This is actually the cross is a Christian cross against a crescent in the same field in a Muslim country. That won't work. So both these flag ideas were rejected. But so then why couldn't we just go with this flag? The problem with this flag was that they wanted a slightly different thing, a little more symmetrical. The charkha is a difficult design element, difficult to draw correctly, etc. And also by then, the Ashoka chakra had been discovered, in the sense that the fact that Ashoka, the emperor from 2,300 years ago, had ruled all of India, almost all of India as we know it today, as one country, way back in 300 or 200 BC or BCE. So the legend of Ashoka, the fact that he was a king of India, had only been found out recently in the 20th century. And Ashoka had caught hold of everybody's imaginations, particularly because his symbol was a chakra. A chakra, the wheel of law. Dharma will always, the wheel of law, of truth will always be, worshipped and held in high reverence in this country. It was also Buddhist, a Buddhist symbol. Again, Buddhism is an old religion of India. And Buddhism practices ahimsa, Ashoka practiced ahimsa, Gandhiji sort of practiced non-violence, satyagraha in his fight against the British. So the chakra was felt, it was more symmetric, it was more beautiful, it was more meaningful now, and it would fit right in. Gandhiji was not very happy with that. He really would have liked the charkha to be there, but then he gave in, and therefore we finally have this flag as the flag of India, our Tiranga, Hamara Tiranga. Jai Hind. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that presentation.
Thank you so much, Rupa. This was such an amazing session. We have some questions that have been submitted by children about the Indian flag and its evolution. And we are going to ask some of those questions. We got a lot more, but I'm going to ask three main questions that were submitted. The first submitted, the first question is, does the Indian flag hold the same symbolism now or in the coming years after we got our independence as it did during the British rule or during the independence movement?
Oh, that's a really a good question. It makes me pause to think, but I think flags as symbols are just really important at any given time. Sure, they assume a different significance when you're in the middle of a revolution for freedom, or if you're uniting against a common enemy or an oppressor. then they have a very different significance. Or when you're going to war, then they mean something really different. But, as they say, like in times of peace, sport is a proxy for war. So when you go to the Olympics, once again, when you have the march past at the inauguration, at the opening ceremony of the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games or the Asian Games, then there's such pride in being picked to be the one who carries the flag, the sports person who leads the contingent on the field. So that is important in sport, and in any international event where India is being represented, important. But also just as a ritual, as a sort of where you renew your vows to your country. You come together on Independence Day, on Republic Day, on these festivals, national festivals, to remind yourself what went into the coming together of your country, what sacrifices were made, how this country came to be, and to remind ourselves, to teach the younger generation that, retell those stories, sing those songs, and sort of remind ourselves that this country did not come to be by chance. Because we tend to forget in peacetime. We become all individualistic. We think about ourselves. We become more clannish. And we forget that we belong to this larger idea of a nation. So to revive those vows to nationhood and to realize who we are as a people, I think flags are important. And definitely in India, they carry a lot of symbolism even today. And like I was thinking about it and saying that every time the flag is hoisted, especially in these recent Olympics that happened in Tokyo, my God, we won more medals than we ever have. It's not a lot of medals for such a big country, but the kind of pride it generated every time the national flag was hoisted and the national anthem was played, or every Indian, 1.4 billion hearts were full. So yes, I think definitely flags are important, and definitely the Indian flag is very important to the Indian people.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I live in New York City. Whenever my kids see the Indian flag, they notice it. They make sure we notice it, and they're proud about it. Like especially
Yes.
driving through Fifth Avenue and seeing the flag, which is always flying at the Indian consulate. We always notice. My kids always notice it.
Right. Yeah, that's right. You're right. If when you live outside India, it's even more important, I think. Yeah.
So, Rupa, the second question has been submitted by a 10-year-old, and his question is, what did the Indian flag look like before the Britishers came to India? And was it similar? Was it different? So if you can let us know about that. And I think this is particularly critical because I feel in your discussion, in your presentation, we took a very chronological approach of how it evolved, which was really special to me because I've never seen anything that was taught about the Indian flag in such a well chronological and organized way. So if you can answer his question, please.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that means this 10-year-old was really paying attention, because he noticed that we started talking about the flag only from 1757 onwards, when the East India Company came in, right? And we started talking about the East India flag. So what was before? What were the flags before? What did India have as her flag? So the answer is that India was not one country before this. So there was no one flag for all of this geography. It was, only around 1947 did we begin to think of ourselves as one country under one flag. Until then, it was a collection of many, many princely states, many kingdoms whose borders were fluid. They kept constantly changing as annexations happened or other kingdoms lost part of their territory to some aggressor. So that the borders kept changing. So, however, each of these princely states definitely had their own flag. There wasn't one flag for the whole of India, but each princely state had a flag, and the design on the flag, or what was the pattern of the flag, all that depended on the personal whim or wish of the ruler or the dynasty. And so, for instance, the flag of Travancore, for instance, had a conch shell. Another state, I can't remember which, had a icon of Hanuman on their flag. And so it just depended, and a lot of Hindu kingdoms would have that kind of iconography. Muslim kingdoms would have a different kind of iconography in their flags. But flags were always have been very important. And if we go even further back, then if you think about the Mahabharata, and if you think about the Gita, and what was the flag during the Kurukshetra flag flying on Arjuna's chariot? It was the flag of Hanuman again. So everybody had flags. And because you could see only the flag for a lot of the time, when everybody was in the crush of war, you could see flags. And the flag would identify who the rider of the chariot was, or which side he belonged to. So yeah, so that's the thing. And it's very interesting. You should ask this. I want to ask all the children listening in, and even the adults, to go and look up flags of different princely states in India. I think it will be a fascinating exercise, and you can discuss why they possibly chose those symbols for their flags, and it could tell you a lot about the culture, the dynasty of that particular territory.
Yeah. Like even when, you know, Britishers were colonizing so many countries, there were elements that were maintained in the flag. And you take us through that as well.
Yes.
So Rupa, our third and last question for today is more about the switch from the charkha to the chakra and when that happened. So the question is, once the switch happened, was the element and the key role of that object still maintained? And what were the similarities, or how did the core element change? I think it's a very deep question, but if you can... It
is. I'm very impressed with these questions that the children are asking, actually. And it makes me think, I didn't think about that, but it's a very, very valid question. And if I think about it, so the charkha was replaced by the chakra. So in one sense, there is a lot of similarity, even though the objects are different. The similarity exists in the movement that is, intrinsic to both. There is a kind of clockwise movement, and movement, even if you go back to Indian philosophy, what we feel in India is that wherever there is movement and change is the only constant. As long as there is movement, something is dynamic, alive, vital. The moment movement stops, then everything becomes stagnant and it dies. It has to fall. And that's a very different view of time and of history and everything, because from the West, where the West likes to keep things pickled in brine, like old buildings, heritage, they like to keep it all there. And preservation of ancient buildings becomes very important in ancient things. Whereas in India, the general thinking is there has to be movement. If it has served its purpose and it's not needed anymore, tear it down. Something else can come up in its place. So there's always movement. And that whole circular motion comes from our concept of time. We take our cues from nature, and in nature, it's nothing linear about nature. There is spring, there is summer, there is fall, there is winter, and once again, there is spring. So there's a constant motion. So all that, I think, is encapsulated in the general structure of the charkha and the chakra. But more importantly, like I mentioned, more specifically, Gandhi was not fully on board with this changing the charkha with the chakra, replacing the charkha with the chakra, because for him, the charkha meant something much deeper than just movement. It meant for him self-reliance. It was a symbol of self-reliance. It became the symbol of the freedom movement. It meant respecting people who work with their hands, the handicrafters, and it meant that everyone should be able to do their own things with their hands, so that then you respect people who work with their hands, which is the antithesis of the general caste system, where people who worked with their hands were considered to be the lowest. So his thing was handicrafters, people who makers who use their hands are thing. And so in that sense, the charkha included everybody, and it had served for so long, especially for him and through him, as a symbol of the revolution, of a peaceful revolution. And so he wasn't too happy with the chakra replacing it, but of course he went with the popular opinion, and Jawaharlal Nehru told him, Babuji, it actually looks more symmetric, the chakra rather than the charkha, because he was the aesthete. He was thinking, how does it look, and but also the chakra meant the wheel of dharma, which also was very deeply very Indian, in its thinking, in its philosophy. So it worked. But I was thinking about it as I was speaking, and I think that's a very good question, because what it has brought home to me is that actually the spirit of the charkha is very deeply embedded in the flag of today, because the official national flags can only be made on khadi cloth. And khadi is the charkha. So, so the charkha is very much like handloom, make with hands, no machines, so nothing synthetic about it. So the spirit of the charkha is very much enshrined in the national flag of today. And before I end, as I was speaking, something else came to me that, I said in my conversation, my presentation, that there was a Lala someone, and I couldn't recall his name at that time, who suggested the idea of a charkha in the national flag to Gandhi. And that was how the whole thing about Gandhi got galvanized by it. He said, that's exactly the symbol we need. I remembered who it was. It was Lala Hansraj. And anyone who's been to Delhi or has family in Delhi knows of Hansraj College, which is part of Delhi University. So Lala Hansraj was an educationist of that time, after whom Hansraj College is named. And he was the one who suggested to Gandhi that a charkha could be included.
Yes. And, I just have to, we have more questions, but Rupa, we don't have any more time. But I just want to end the session by saying, I have learned so much about the Indian flag, its evolution, and not just Indian flag. I think it goes beyond the Indian flag, about, the population, how we have changed also. I am a very big fan of yours. You know that. My family is a very big fan of yours. I request anyone who has watched this session live, please share this video with anyone that you know might be interested in this topic. And I want to thank the Indian Consulate for inviting Rupa for doing these sessions. Our next session is going to be on luminous lessons from ancient India, which is Rupa's big expertise. I really would urge everyone to try to attend that session. Rupa is going to talk about her books, the Gita, the Upanishads, the Veda. And just a big news is that Rupa's book, The Gita for Children, has officially sold 100,000 copies worldwide.
Yes. Yeah.
Big feat. So definitely attend that session, because we will talk about that book, The Gita for Children. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Rupa. This was absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Anu, for being such a wonderful moderator and always being my cheerleader. So thank you. And thank you to the Indian High Commission for organizing this. And I'm so glad I picked this topic. Yes. Because at least in the 75th year of our independence, during the Amrit Mahotsav, I came to know, while I was researching, so many things about our flag. I knew a few things and I thought I knew it. But when I had to go deep into it to research it for a talk, the stuff I found out just makes me really proud to be an Indian and makes me want to stand behind the flag at all times. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rupa. Namaste, everyone.
Namaste, Jai Hind. Thank you.